20.
Yes, we received. Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay.
Received.
Right. So, okay. Right. So we are going to discuss the question 12 to question 20. And Ms. Anupama, I went through your answers. You have done an excellent job. Right. So very well answered, Ms. Anupama.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I really appreciate your answers. Right. So what we are going to do today is we are going to have a very quick look on the answers from question 12 to question 20. Right, so actually I'm not going to discuss each and every fact as I have sent you the answers. I'm going to brief the answers and teach you how to write them. Right, so the question number 12 is about explain the philosophical base of Charvaka school and distinguish the dissimilarity with other religious teachers. Right, so the if you mark before you are writing an answer to the question, first you need to highlight the main points of the question. Right, so last week I taught you that. Right, so within this question it has two main parts. The first one is to explain the philosophical base of the Charvaka school, and the other part is to distinguish the dissimilarity with other religious teachings. Right, so in the first part you have to give a brief introduction to the Charvaka school. Right, so if we take Charvaka school, it falls under the category of Lokayatas or the materialistic tradition. Right, so if you take Lokayatas, it was the Ajita Kesa Kambali could be identified as, this is about the Lokayatas. Right, so Charvaka is a concept under the Lokayatas. Right, so the Lokayatas, the teacher, one of the teachers could be identified as Ajit Kesa Kambali. Right, so if we talk now about the Charvakas, similarly to the Lokayatas, Charvakas also denied the existence of eternal soul and God. Right, so they accepted the Charvakas, the followers of the Charvakas, they accepted the wealth and the enjoyment. Right, so and they did not believe in soul, salvation, or afterlife. They accepted and identified the death as the final liberation, which the followers of the Charvakas tradition. Right, so the Charvakas, according to the Charvakas, the highest purpose of the life was the uninhibited enjoyment, and they rejected all means of knowledge except direct perception. Right, so that is a quick actually I'm not going to teach the every point here, rather I'm going to discuss the main points to answer the question. Right, so that is a brief introduction to the Charvaka school, and the second part is to distinguish the dissimilarity with the other religious teachers. Right, so if we take the dissimilarity, the one point I have taken two main points here. The Charvakas accepted wealth. The followers of the Charvakas accepted wealth and the enjoyment, and according to them, the highest purpose of life was uninhibited enjoyment. But in contrast, the most of other schools did not accept the fact of enjoyment. Right, even though the Charvakas accepted the uninhibited enjoyment, the other schools, they did not accept the enjoyment. Rather, many of them, if you take the Ajivakas, they never enjoyed, they practiced the enjoyment. Rather, they practiced severe austerities. Right, if you take Ajivakas, and if you take Buddhism, the follow Buddha as well as the Buddhist followers, they follow the middle path. Right, so it is one of the dissimilarities. So you could identify by your own, by identifying and going through the specific philosophies. Apart from these 2 points, you may have other points as well. Right, so I have mentioned 2 main points here, and the other point is, even though they did not believe in soul, salvation, or afterlife, some other religions accepted and they followed, like they believed in soul, salvation, and afterlife. Right, so those are 2 main dissimilarities we could identify within the Charvakas when we compare it with the other religions. Right, so that is question number 12. Then the question number 13. 13 is discuss the position assigned to women in the early and later Vedic period, right? So the main topic is to discuss the positions assigned to women, and this question also we could divide into two main parts: the position assigned to women during the early Vedic period and the position assigned to women within the later Vedic period, right? So here I have mentioned like within two separate paragraphs how early Vedic period women and how later Vedic period women they enjoyed or they suffered, right? So if you take early Vedic period, I'm going through the answers very quickly, right? So the egalitarian society was there. We learned that fact, right? So women were given equal position within the society. Equal, they were treated equally to men within the early Vedic period, and they had the ability. They allowed to participate in tribal assemblies, right? Within the early Vedic period, there were some tribal gatherings or assemblies called Samiti and Sabha, right? So the women within the early Vedic period, they were allowed, they had the right to participate in such gatherings, right? So, and they further had political rights. Women had political rights. And also, even though the patriarchal type families were there, the father was the main person within the society within the early Vedic period, but that is what we known as the patriarchal society, type society. Even though the patriarchal type society was prevalent during the early Vedic period, uh, it did not underestimate the rights or values of the women, right? So women were also had the required recognition, similar recognition as men. Wife took care of household, where both husband and wife had equal positions within the family, right? So the women were given respectable positions, right? So, and they had the freedom to express their thoughts within the society, and they had the chance to educate themselves. And many educated women who did many women occupied they did many occupied women were there, like teachers, philosophers, and poets. Many famous poets were there during the early Vedic period. And the when it comes to the marriage, they had the women who lived within the early Vedic period, they had the chance to marry the person that they want to marry, right? They had the chance to choose their life partner, right? And the child marriages were not prevalent, wasn't there during the early Vedic period, right? So but when it comes to the later Vedic period, this was completely changed, right, into upside down. Women lost their recognition, independence when it comes to the later Vedic period, right? So many restrictions were imposed upon women, right? So women were treated very inferior or subordinate to men, right? So the patriarchal families were there within the early Vedic period as well, but the power of the father, when it comes to the later Vedic period, power of father was increased, but no improvements were made to the status of women. Rather, they lost their recognition within the later Vedic period, right? So, and women were restricted to participate in social gatherings. Women were restricted to participate in social gatherings, right? So and also they lost their political rights. Child marriages became prevalent, right? So earlier, the child marriages were not there, but when it comes to the later Vedic period, child marriages became very common, and the birth of a daughter was identified as a misery or burden to the family or to the entire society, right? And also when it comes to the marriages, earlier, they had the chance to choose their life partners, but when it comes to the later Vedic period, they lost that chance, right? So they had to obey their mainly to their parents' decisions. Parents were the ones who selected their life partners based on dowries and all, right? So what happened was women lost their chance to choose their life partners. Rather, they had to obey to the parents or society's decision, right? So as a whole, what happened was women lost their recognition within the society when it comes to the later Vedic period, right? So that is how you should answer to the question if it is asked to discuss about the position assigned to women during the both early and later Vedic periods. Right, so the question number 14 is to discuss the Brahmin teachings of women and show how Buddhist critique on it. Right, so when we this discussion also have two main parts. To discuss the Brahmin's teachings of women and to show how Buddhist critique on it. Right, so the when we talk about the Brahmin's teachings, it is very similar to the later Vedic period, how the women were treated within the later Vedic period. So I'm not going to talk about it, but I have in the first paragraph I have indicated the how the Brahmins treated women. Right, so you could go through that. They lost their everything. They lost their identity. They lost their recognition. They were not allowed to participate any social gatherings. They lost their political rights. They were identified as very superior to the inferior to the men, subordinate or inferior to men, right? So, and the birth of a daughter to the family was identified as a misery to the entire society. And if a daughter was born to a woman, then it was regarded as the woman's fault, that specific woman's fault. Thereby, if she was unable to give a birth to a son or a boy, then that husband had the chance to remarry another woman, right? So that is how the women were treated according to the under the Brahminic teachings. That is how women were treated. Now let's look at how Buddha criticized that and how Buddha treated women. Right. So in contrast, Buddha had a very liberal attitude towards women. Right. So, and Buddha always tried to give a recognition, compassion, and equal position to the women. Right. So within the Brahminic society and during the later Vedic period, women could be identified as an oppressed society. Right. They were very oppressed. Right. So but Buddha always tried to give an equal position to women within the society. Right, so Buddha stressed on that good qualities and attitudes will make the worthiness within the society, but not the gender. Right, so Buddha rejected always within the Buddhism. Buddha rejected prepubescent marriages or child marriages, and girls were given chance to choose their life partners according to their wishes. Right, so the within the Buddhism, the woman is treated as one independent entity, right? So they had their own responsibility. They were given chance to make their decisions by their own, right? Thereby, the women were treated as one independent entity within the society, right? So the most importantly within the Buddhist tradition, ordination, the women were also welcome to the religion, right? So welcome to the religions, and they were given permission. Even not only they gave the chance to embrace the religion, but also they were given the chance or given the permission to enter into the monastic order as well, right? And apart from that, education was allowed according to the Buddhism. According to the Buddha, education was given to both lay women and as well as to nuns. Right? So Buddha saw equal spiritual potential in both men and women. Right? So within the Brahmanism, only they believed that only the men had the spiritual potential to grab to grab the doctrinal facts. But Buddha rejected that, and Buddha saw equal spiritual potentials in both men and women. Right, so there were many Buddhist laity and laity followers as well as bhikkhunis, and most of them achieved the sainthood. Right, so that is how Buddha tried to give equal position. That is how Buddha criticized the the way in which Brahmins treated the women, and how Buddha gave the equal position, uplifted the position within the uplifted the position of women within the society. That is how Buddha worked on that, right? So that is how to answer the question number 14, right? So question number 15, reveal whether there is a resemblance between the teachings of Jainism and Brahmanism, right? So we learned this we actually pointed out the resemblance or similarities between Jainism and Buddhism in our within our lecture, right? So actually, within this question, to answer the within the answer to this question, I have mentioned all the equalities or similarities within this question, but specifically, if you go through the question, it has asked review whether there is a resemblance between the teachings of Jainism and Buddhism. Right? It has basically asked about the teachings of Jainism and Buddhism. Right? So if you are given a question to question as review whether there is a resemblance between the Jainism and Buddhism, obviously you could jot down the almost all the facts which I have included here, right? So I have included almost all the facts, but specifically this question has indicated the resemblance between the teachings of the Jainism and Buddhism, right? So thereby, for your knowledge, I have indicated all the facts, but if you were asked to jot down or asked to write the point out the teachings, you should include only the doctrinal facts. You should include only the doctrinal fact, right? So you could give a brief introduction to the question like Mahavira and Buddha were contemporaries and there were many common in between them, right? So I will go through the facts which I have written here. Both the Buddhism and Jainism included doctrinal facts about intellectual, spiritual, and social forces and challenged the existed Brahminical order during this era, right? So actually it is about teaching fact. Right, so teachings, if we take the teachings, this is about doctrinal facts, right? So you could include that. And the second point I have included here, both the doctrines were both of them belong to Kshatriya families, right? So even though I have included here, actually to answer this question, this is actually not valid, right? So it is not talking about the teachings of the doctrinal facts of the Jainism and Jainism and Buddhism, right? So for your information, even though I have mentioned them, right? So whenever if you ask to discuss the teachings of Jainism and Buddhism, you should only write the similarities within the doctrines, right? Right. So the next point is the source of the both. You could take this as a similarity. The source of both religions are the source for the both religions are indebted to Upanishads, right? So it is about a doctrinal fact, right? So the Siddhartha Gautama, the next one I have included here, Siddhartha Gautama and Mahavira had renunciant life from a similar age. Actually, it is not about a doctrinal fact. If you were generally asked to write about the similarities, you could write that, right? So both the Gautama Buddha and Mahavira attained some form of enlightenment, and it is also not a doctrinal fact. If you take the next one, it talks about the doctrinal facts. Doctrinally, Buddhism and Jainism have much in common, where both postulate countless past rebirths, no creator to the world, karma, and etc., and liberation by self-effort of the individual under the guidance by their tradition. Both the religions believe the concepts of nirvana or liberation. That is a similarity. The teaching, the doctrinal similarity in between the Buddhism and Jainism, right? So the next one is also a doctrinal similarity. The both denied the authority of Vedas and performing sacrifices and rituals, and both of them were opposed to animal sacrifices, right? So it is a doctrinal similarity, right? So the Buddhism as well as Jainism were taught to people using more common languages. It is not a doctrinal similarity or equality. It is a common equality. If you take the language, they both were taught using very common languages where any person within the society could grasp or understand. Next point, both these religious teachers tried to give equality to all the castes and classes which were predetermined by Brahmins. This is a equality that we could identify within the teachings of the two of these doctrines. Both the teachings rejected and attacked the caste system, rituals, and sacrifices. Right? They treated equally to all the human beings within the society, and in both the religions welcomed any person, irrespective to the social class, to the religion, right? So and within the both religions, women were given required status and identity within the society. Ahimsa or non-violence is a prominent principle within both the religions, right? So another the similarity under the Buddhist and Jain teachings are right conduct. They stressed upon right conduct and right knowledge, but not upon the religious rituals, right? The last 3 points are actually not doctrinal similarities. Rather, you could, if you were asked to write common similarities in between Jainism and Buddhism, you could write them down, right? So the both the religions divided into two main sects. If we take the Buddhism, Mahayana and Hinayana, Jainism, Svetambara and Digambara, right? So both the religions, Buddhism as well as Jainism, they had own three gems respectively: Buddhism, Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha; Jainism, right philosophy, right knowledge, and right character. Right. So both the religions had their own three main religious texts: Buddhism, Vinaya Pitaka, Sutta Pitaka, and Abhidhamma Pitaka; Jainism, Anga, Upanga, and Mulgrajita. Right. So those were common similarities in between Buddhism and Jainism. Right. So that is about the different similarities in between the Buddhism and Jainism. Right. The next question is, with brief explanation of Makkali Gosala's teachings, explain why it was criticized by Buddhism and Jainism. Right. So if we take this question also, it could be divided into two main parts. Right. So the first you need to give a brief explanation to the teachings of the Makkali Gosala, and second, within your second part, you should explain why it was the teachings of the Makkali Gosala was criticized by Buddhism and Jainism, right? So the if you take Makkali Gosala, if you give a brief introduction to the Makkali Gosala and his teachings, the Makkali Gosala could be identified as a founder or leader to the Ajivakas tradition. And if you take the Ajivakas tradition or the school, it was well known for Niyati or the fate, Niyati concept of fate. They believed in absolute fatalism and determinism, right? So everything which happened, everything which is happening, everything which will happen are entirely preordained and functions by cosmic principles. And they further believe that due to this predetermined fate, it is impossible for living beings to achieve liberation or the moksha from the cycle of birth and death, right? So they believe that it is impossible to attain moksha. Ajivakas believed karma doctrine. They did not believe in karma doctrine. They believed karma doctrine as a fallacy, right? So why it is criticized by, now let's look at why the teachings of Makkali Gosala was criticized by the Buddha and the Jain tradition, or by the Mahavira. If we take Buddha believed in karma. Buddha believed in karma, but Makkali Gosala did not. And our present life and future life will depend on our actions, right? So, but Makkali Gosala did not. And according to the Buddhist tradition, our final goal or the final aim is to attain Nibbana or moksha. But when it comes to the Makkali Gosala, according to the Makkali Gosala, according to the Ajivakas tradition, they believe that according to them, they believe that it is impossible for living beings to attain moksha, right? So, and within the Jain tradition, they also believed in karma, but Makkali Gosala did not, and they practiced ahimsa, and thereby Jain tradition or the Mahavira was also criticized the teachings of the Makkali Gosala. Right, so that is the brief introduction to the teachings of the Makkali Gosala and why it was criticized by the Buddhism and by the Mahavira or the Jainism. Right, so the 17th question is to examine the salient features of economic and political background within the 6th century, right? So it was a recent topic where we discussed recently, right? Those are the salient features of economic and political background within this 6th century BCE and show how they contributed to the formation of India, right? So if we look at the salient features of economic and political within the 6th century, right? So within the 6th century BCE means within the time of the Buddha, right? So we learned that very recently, as I indicated earlier. So we could go through it very fastly, right? So if we take the economic features within the 6th century BCE, earlier at the very beginning, the agricultural crops like wheat and rice, they were the main crops which were harvested, and based on the agricultural economy was there at the very beginning, right? So these processes developed throughout the time, and what happened was several like iron axes and plowshares came into existence, and thereby they further could expand their agricultural processes, and thereby what happened was population levels increased, right? So, and they not only harvested crops only for the consumption, but also they due to these developments, what happened was they harvested the surplus. The surplus was used for trade. And the later within the 6th century BCE, what happened was earlier the agricultural agricultural practices were the main sphere of the economic activity within the 6th century BCE. But later on, what happened was due to the developments and increase of the population, what happened was the trade and merchandise became the independent sphere of the economy, right? So thereby the economic developments were occurred, and apart from that, in order to survive, the government also had to survive, right? So in order to survive, several taxes were started to collect from the normal community, right? So that is a brief introduction to the economic policies or the economic background within the 6th century BCE. And if you take the political background, actually we learned these facts in detail, but as this is a one question, we need to summarize them, right? We need to summarize them, and we could not write all the points that we learned, right? So what we have to do is we have to summarize whenever we write an answer, right? So but when it comes to the when we talk about the political background, the unit of the polity was Janapada, right? So Janapada were the like agricultural settlements which were there, and Janapadas were consisted with villages, towns, and cities, right? So and some Janapadas further developed and formed Mahajanapadas, right? So Mahajanapadas were ruled by the Rajas or the by several chief lineages, right? So, and we learned about 16 Mahajanapadas which were prevailed during the 6th century BCE, right? So, and there was a standing army to protect the territory, and also those standing army was paid by the taxes collected from the normal people, And due to these political developments and emergences, so what happened was, due to these developments, many emergences were occurred, and ultimately non-kinship groups came into existence. Non-kinship group came into existence due to these continuous developments, right? So and not only that, various occupations increased throughout the time. Earlier only mainly the cattle keepers were there, but throughout the time, due to the developments, what happened was ironsmiths, agriculturists, woodworkers, likewise several occupations came into existence, right? So thereby trade became more prevalent, became the main sphere of the economic activity. Economy and economies became more prosperous, right? So and also due to these continuous economic developments, exchanging goods, the barter system came into existence, and coinage, they started to use coins, came into existence. And apart from that, in order to protect the territories, massive fortifications were built to protect cities from invaders, right? So the newly emerged merchant class controlled and trade the entire territories within the 6th century BCE, and further economic developments were acquired, right? So the above mentioned economic and political developments help to form the early state of India. These political and economic developments help to form the early state of India, right? So that is how you should answer the question. Within this question, you were asked to examine, and you were asked to write about the salient features of economic and political background within the 6th century BCE, right? So what I recommend is, you should not study the answer which I have given here. Rather, try to go through the lecture notes again and again, go through the answer which I have given, and combine them and try to develop your own answer, right? So that is what I am recommending for you to do, right? So question number 18, discuss how new trends of politics in the 6th century BCE contributed to the propagation of Buddhism. Right, so even though we actually did not talk about this within the class, I have included some extra points here which did not discuss within the class, right? So the new trends of the politics within the 6th century BCE contributed to the propagation of Buddhism, right? So now with the earlier question, we talked about the how the new trends of the political system, how the polity was developed, right? So many if you take the Janapadas, the Janapadas and Mahajanapadas, they were ruled by kings, right? Kings or rajas, right? So these political trends and political leaders contributed to propagate the Buddhism, right? So the earlier actually Brahmanism, or the Brahmin order was there. Thereby, the people were fed up with that. Or the rigid social class division was there. All the people were not allowed to embrace the religion. Only the Brahmins or the higher hierarchy level people only had the chance to embrace the religions and all. But throughout the time, people were fed up with that, the sacrificial ceremonies and in vain rituals, and they wanted to advance their spiritual advancements, and to have liberal practices, right? So they wanted to advocate like non-violence, right? So that is why many people embrace the religion Buddhism as well as Jainism, right? So there's so many high potential within the Buddhism as well as Jainism, like they could spiritually advance themselves through within these religions, and there were many religious practices. They did not advocate any in vain sacrificial rituals, right? So they advocated the practices such as non-violence, right? So the metta feeling to others, right? So thereby many people followed those religions. Those are the social facts why the which help to propagate or to which help to expand the religion Buddhism, right? So if we look at the political trends, political facts which help to contribute which contributed to the propagation of Buddhism, mainly we could talk about the royal patronage given by the kings, royal patronage given by the kings. Now, if we take the entire Buddhist ordination or the Buddhist doctrine, there were many kings who patronized the Buddhism, right? So King Bimbisara, Ajatasattu, Asoka, Kanishka, Harshavardhana, right? So there were many kings who patronized the Buddhism, right? So if we take the King Asoka, we learn this. He deputed his children, the Mahinda and Sanghamitta, to spread the Buddhism to Sri Lanka as well, right? So now this question is, I have mentioned, talked about these kings as an introduction, but within this question, the new trends within the 6th century BCE, right? So within the time of the Buddha, right? So thereby I have indicated how the King Bimbisara was there within the lifetime of the Buddha. Thereby I have mentioned how King Bimbisara propagated the Buddhism, right? So within the earlier paragraph, I have mentioned as an introduction, there were many kings who patronized Buddhism, but actually we could, even though we could talk about how King Asoka and King Kanishka contributed to Buddhism, but they were not belong to 6th century BCE, right? So thereby we could not talk about them. Rather, I have indicated about the King Bimbisara, as King Bimbisara was there during the 6th century BCE, right? So the king, if we go through that, you could go through that leisurely, right? So this is, I have mentioned the ways in which how King Bimbisara propagated or the given patronage to the Buddhism, right? So King Bimbisara was an influential disciple within the Buddhist tradition when Buddha was alive, right? So, and it is said that he had acquired Sotapannahood within the religion Buddhism, right? So likewise I have indicated the several facts how King Bimbisara patronized the Buddhism, right? So you could go through one by one and leisurely whenever you have time, right? So we are not going to talk about that. I'm not going to read them now as we have limited time, right? So you could go through, and whenever as you within this question, as you were asked only to write about the 6th century BCE, we have the chance to write about the King Bimbisara, right? So if 6th century BCE was not there, then you could talk about obviously how King Kanishka patronized Buddhism, how uh, King Kanishka and the other kings patronized the Buddhism, right? So likewise, you could write about each and every king who patronized the Buddhism, as this was asked about the 6th century BCE. I have mentioned about only the King Bimbisar, how he patronized the Buddhism, right? So apart from 6th century BCE, how King Harshavardhana, Kanishka, King Asoka, right? You could jot down how they patronized the Buddhism, right? Right. So the next question is question number 19. Illustrate the social status of women given in the Jain tradition, right? So we learned this, and I have included some extra points here as we did not discuss all the facts within the class, right? So you should go through this answer leisurely, and you could memorize the important facts which I have indicated here. This is a very there is a high chance of this question to be appear in your test paper, right? So thereby go through this question, and try to memorize the facts which I have indicated here. right? So if we look at go through it very quickly, only the important facts, right? The now like similar to the Buddhism, Mahavira also within the Jain tradition, the women enjoyed a social and religious equality, right? So the Mahavira strongly believed that equality for all human beings and was certainly advanced for his times, right? Similar to the Buddhism, Mahavira was also irrespective to the caste or class and irrespective to the gender, all the people within the society were admitted to the ordain, right? So he admitted both men and women of all castes to the ordination within the Jainism. And the comprehensive education was given to the women within the Jain tradition. Comprehensive education was given to the women, and also there were trained teachers who were specialized in their own subjects within the Jain tradition. There were trained teachers, women teachers who were specialized within their own subjects, right? So and I have given some extra information here, right? So the Lord Mahavir had many women disciples. I have indicated like Trishala, Yashoda. Actually, if we talk about his many family members, he given his family, the female family members, the chance, not only the family members but also to the entire society. Mainly, his family, the female family members were also given a high level of chance within his ordination. If we take his wife, sister, daughter, they all were given the chance within the ordination, right? So, and apart from that, I have indicated, I have given many other women disciples who were there within the Jain tradition and how the Mahavira treated them. And during the Mahavira's period, women were respected and cared, right? So the similar to the Buddhism, women were respected and they were cared, right? So the women were said to be blessed one, virtuous and worthy, right? And absolute auspicious within the Jain tradition. Now, within the Brahmanism, the women were treated as a misery, right? So, but in contrast, within the Jain tradition, women were considered as absolutely auspicious, right? Women were considered as absolutely auspicious and they were given respectable and equal position within the Jain tradition. They were allowed to enter into the ordination, they were allowed to educate themselves, and they were given equal position similar to men within the Jain tradition. Right, so you could go through the answer leisurely and try to memorize the important facts which I have included within this answer. The social status of women given in the Jain tradition, right? Simply, we could say the high level of recognition to women was given within the Jain tradition, right? So the final question is the question number 20, to write short notes about the topics which were given, right? So whenever you were asked to write short notes, you don't have to give a very descriptive explanations, rather try to give very brief explanations to the asked question, asked topic, right? So the first one is ahimsa. I'm not going to actually discuss them in detail, right? So if you take ahimsa, but in my answer sheet I have mentioned them in detail. You could go through them later, right? So we will have a quick look on the short notes. Ahimsa, which simply means non-violence, right? So, or ethical principle of not causing harm to other living beings, right? So that is ahimsa. Sanjay Belatiputta, I have given a brief introduction, right? So if we brief that it furthermore, Sanjay Belatiputta was the heretical teacher to Ajnanis, and they believed in this specific school believed in the absolute or universal indeterminism, right? They believed in indeterminism, right? So, and also the third short note topic is Purna Kassapa, right? So the Purna Kassapa could be identified as founder or the proponent to Ahetuvadis, and they believed in a moral or and purposeless nature of the soul, right? Atharva Veda, the fourth part, right? So this is attributed to a priest or sage group named Atharvan, and Atharva Veda. This is a specific ritual handbook by Brahmins. Right, so I have given more explanation. You should go through them. Right, Rig Veda, one of the could be identified as the oldest Veda, and it was the basically used by a priest group called Hotri. Right, so the question, the short note number 6, Mandukya Upanishad. It belongs to the Atharva Veda, and it was named as Mandukya due to its sage teacher Mandukya. Within the Mandukya Upanishad, we could see, and it was the famous for 4 stages of the human life, such as walking, dreaming, profound sleep, and turiya. Right, so and it is said that Mandukya Upanishad alone is enough to get one's liberation. Right, so the middle path, I have given a brief introduction to the explanation to the middle path. Buddhist understanding of the practical life. Middle path generally refers to the avoidance to extremes, right, of practical life, namely indulgence in sensual pleasures on the other hand, and severe ascetics on the other hand, ascetic practices on the other hand. 8, Aranyakas, right? So the within the now we learned that Samhitas, Brahmanas, Aranyakas, and Upanishads, right? So within Samhitas and Brahmanas, they excessively talks about the ritual practices and sacrificial ceremonies, right? So throughout the time, was people were fed up with the these ritual invine ritual practices, right? Thereby, many people left the society in order to reside in forests to gain spiritual knowledge. So that part we identified as the Aranyakas, right? So the Aranyakas stage is also known as the path to sacrifices to path to knowledge, right? So thereby this knowledge was to be attained through the within the Aranyakas, this knowledge to be attained through the severe ascetic practices, right? Then 9th, karma and rebirth according to the Buddhism, right? So I have given a brief introduction to the karma and rebirth, right? So karma, if we take karma, if we do good deeds, then good outcomes will come, and if we do bad, then bad outcomes will come, right? So if we talk about the rebirth, it's a cycle, like samsara is a cycle of birth and death, and Buddhists aim to escape from this rebirth, from this cycle, right? So you could go through that karma and rebirth. And the final one is the Gautama Buddha. As we all know about the Gautama Buddha, you all could give a write a brief short note on Gautama Buddha. Thereby, I did not give an answer to the Gautama Buddha, right? So you could give your own brief explanation as a short note to the Gautama Buddha. Right, so that is all about the revision questions, and those revision questions were basically based on your past papers and the sample paper which I have made. And before your exam, before you go into your exam, you should be able to write all those 20 questions which we discussed so far, and the sample paper. I sent you a sample paper, right? You should write the answers to all these 20 questions and to the sample paper. And also, apart from that, here I have given 9 hints for the paper. 9 hints for your paper, right? So we have already talked about almost all topics which are included here. The first one is religious nature and culture of the Vedic Aryans. We discussed that last week. Brahmanic teachings and the society. We discussed that. Brahmanic tradition and its salient features, we discussed that. Upanishadic teaching and Brahmanism, we discussed that about the Upanishadic teachings as well as the Brahmanism. The fifth one, karma and rebirth in the 6th century BCE and their place in Buddhism, right? So we just discussed about the karma and rebirth. Under the short note, you could go through that. And Mahavir and women, we also discussed that. Political structure in Buddha's time, we discussed that. Political structure in Buddha's time is where the political structure during the 6th century BCE. We discussed that short while ago. The eighth one, political and social influence towards the development of Buddhism, right? So under the question number 18. Yes, under the question number 18, we talked about the political contribution, how the kings were the political the developments contributed to the Buddhism, right? So the question here, the hint 8 is about the political and social influence to the development of the Buddhism, right? So the when we talk about the political influences, here the if you were not given the time frame, you could talk about almost all the kings who propagated the Buddhism, right? As we talked earlier. And if we talk the social influences towards the development of Buddhism, right? So within the question number 18, we discussed about the political influence towards the Buddhism, but we did not discuss about the social. Now, question here, the hint 8, we could divide the entire question into two: the political influence towards the Buddhism and the social influence towards the Buddhism, right? So within the question number 18, we discussed only about the political influence towards the Buddhism, right? So then what are the social influences to development of Buddhism, right? So you could indicate uh, the rigid social class systems, right? So the several hierarchies were there. People were fed up with those social hierarchies and classes. Thereby, people wanted to go for a religion which provide equality, right? Thereby, many people embrace the religion Buddhism, right? So there were no invented sacrificial ceremonies and ritual practices within the religion Buddhism. Thereby, Buddhism was expanded. Many people embraced the Buddhism, and there was a very common language was used to teach the Buddhism, where any person within the society could grasp or understand. Thereby, it helped to develop or to propagate the Buddhism, right? So the equality was there, non-violence was there within the Buddhism, right? So those were the social influences which helped to propagate the Buddhism, right? So likewise, you could jot down the political and social influences towards the development of the Buddhism, right? So that is how to answer if you were asked to write about both the political and the social influences towards the Buddhism. And the last one is about the short notes, the inversion theory of Aryans. Actually, we did not discuss about that. It is not within your syllabus. Thereby, I gave a very little explanation about the inversion theory of the Aryans, right? So the it was also known as the indigenous Aryans theory of India, right? So likewise, I have given a very brief introduction. You memorize that before you going to the exam. And the Mandukya Upanishad, we talked about that. Ajivakas, we talked that. Gautama Buddha, obviously you could write about a short note about Gautama Buddha. And Yaga, right? So Yaga, we discussed them, or the yajna, or the sacrificial ceremonies, right? Graya Karmani sacrifices and Shrauta sacrifices, right? Hope you can remember. Graya Karmani means very common and very simple sacrificial ceremonies, where like marriages, funerals, right, births, right? So the within very day-to-day occasions, the sacrificial ceremonies and rituals which were held during very common occasions, and they were very simple, right? So the other sacrificial ceremony, other type of sacrificial ceremonies were the Strauta sacrifices. They were very complex. Many animals were killed for the sake of Strauta sacrifices. They were elaborative and complex types of sacrifices. Ceremonies normal people could not for the Strauta sacrifices. They need to have a priest in order to perform Strauta sacrifices. Only the higher level of people had the chance to perform Strauta sacrifices, right? So likewise, you could write, if you were given the short note topic as Yaga, you could describe about the Graikarmini sacrifices as well as Strauta sacrifices, right? Right. So that is the end of our revision class, right? So, and again, I want you to write answers to all the 20 questions which we discussed so far, right? So I'm not I recommend you to not to depend upon my answer, rather go through the answer which I have given, go through your lecture notes and develop your own answer, and also write the answers for the sample paper which I sent you. The sample paper also contains very similar questions within the 20 questions we discussed today, and go through and write the answers for the hints which I have given today, right? So then all the questions you will get will be similar to those questions, right? So very similar, nothing, you will not get any questions apart from those, right? You will definitely get questions within the questions we discussed, within the questions we discussed so far, and within these hints, right? So study the lecture notes, go through the answers which I have given, right? So go through again and again, try to memorize the facts, write the answers by your own, and try to memorize them. And if you have any question, please email me, right? So sometimes I will not be able to answer. If you call me, I will not be able to answer question, answer your phones, because I'm planning to go to Sri Lanka by the middle of the November, right? So just email me if you have any questions. I will reply you back as soon as I saw your message, right? So do you have any questions? Right. So hope you don't have any questions so far, right? So if you have any question, no worries, just email me. I'm there to help you, right? So
Okay.
practice the questions, and I wish you all the very best for your question, for your exam. Do your best. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for joining with me.
Thank
Best
you very
wishes
much.
to
very
you all.
much.
Thank you very much. Thank you
Thank you
very
very
much.
much.
Thank you very much.